to thank them for offering up their space tonight to have this informational meeting. This is an informational meeting. This is not pro, this is not con. We're not, I mean, voting is going on right now. We want you to have the information you need. We do want you to ask questions, and we're going to try to answer them. City Council has talked a lot about what's best for the city of Dunwoody. How do we move things forward? How do we always get what we, not only what we need, but also maybe what we want? What's the right funding mechanisms and ways to do that? And there's been a lot of discussions about wants and needs. Sometimes we had some parks that we were looking at. We were able to find some park space either through land acquisition when it comes to the park on Vermac, or the park up on Roberts where the Dunwoody Senior Baseball was, with a land swap with Austin Elementary being moved. We now have some space over there. So we have two large properties that need to be or could be developed into parks for those two communities. We're trying to find ways to do that, and through staff and negotiation, council, and trying to figure out which is the best way, looking at our budget, because we have needs when it comes to paving, we have needs on other capital projects that are going forward. The thought was that maybe we could put a bond referendum forward, make these investments now, and let those investments happen this year, next year, really soon, so that our residents for the next 20 years would have those amenities, and then those amenities could be paid for by a bond referendum all along. So everybody gets to use those parks, everybody gets to pay for those types of parks. And that was one of the thinking. There's also the thought of the trails, and the trails trying to put connectivity through the city of Dunwoody. A lot of discussions have happened on that. I personally have been, I might be the odd person out when it comes to the paths in the city of Dunwoody. I have the heartache over the construction of 12-foot sidewalks in front of single-family homes. It's my issue. I think it's unfair. So I'm just one person. You elect a city council of 6 members and a mayor, and it takes 4 people to get anything done. I'm the odd person out. It's a 6-1 vote when it comes to these paths. And when it came to the bond, I really wanted to have 2 questions. I wanted to have a question on parks, because I'm kind of all in. I wish we had a way to do that. And these paths, I'm not all the way in. I have questions, I have concerns. I think there's better ways to do it. But again, I'm only one person. So when it came to the vote on council, I voted no, because there's no way for me to vote for yes for one and no for the other. And I wish there was, but that's okay. Council makes their decision, and it's our decision, our city council. We are putting the best question forward for you, the residents, to make the decision. Now, it's not our decision anymore to make. It's not. This is up to you. This is your decision to put forward how you want to develop the capital projects in the city of Dunwoody. And tonight we're here to put those information to you in a very factual, very logical means, so you can make a decision on whether you want to vote yes or no. And that's pretty much where we are. Tom invited and said he's done a number of these meetings, and I really haven't. I've sort of stepped back a little bit, but I want you to know where I stand, why I voted the way I did. I'm not pro, I'm not con. Not my job to tell you how to vote. My job was to put the best thing forward. Council has now put something forward, and now it's your decision. So Tom, hopefully I said.
All right. So my name is Tom Lambert, serving on the council with John, but tonight really want this to be kind of informal, so I'm just, you're done with your neighbor Tom tonight, right? So let's keep it informal. What the purpose tonight, John, like John said, is just to provide facts. There's a lot of information flying around. All of it is factual, so we want to give you the facts so you can make an informed decision when you go and vote. We'll also answer any questions you have to the best of our ability. Hopefully we'll be able to provide those answers tonight. If we can't, we'll get back to you with them, but hopefully we'll be able to provide those answers. So what I'd like to do is just briefly discuss how we got to where we are, talk about the projects, do a little bond 101, and then finally get to the question of what's it going to cost, because that's what everyone wants to know about too. So real quick, I want to talk about the projects first, because that's really what this is all about. And this was not a hasty decision by the council. We've had a long list of projects on sitting on the shelf, things that we want to do, but we really didn't have a priority assigned to them. We had really no financial assigned to them. We had no way of getting them built. So a couple of years ago, we started to, internally with staff and council, kind of put together, trying to start prioritizing those projects. And last year, we kind of put a first stab at it. But last year, we decided what was most important was to have input from our residents. So the mayor appointed a citizens advisory committee on capital projects. And that was a 9-member committee. 9 residents served on that. I chaired the committee. I was not a voting member, nor was I a part of the discussions. I was simply facilitating the meetings. I believe the committee was a good makeup of our residents. We had younger people on there. We had older people on it. We had men, we had women, we had people with children, people without children. We had the DHA president on there. So we had a pretty good representation of the city. I believe they took their job very serious. There was 104 projects that they were asked to evaluate. And over the course of 7 months, they met 6 times. There were field trips, there was homework. They talked with their neighbors, they talked with their Dunwoody residents. I honestly can tell you, having worked with them, they took the job seriously. And what they came up with, they distilled that list of 104 projects down to the 9 that we're going to discuss tonight as the priorities for the city. So they thought these are the priorities that the city should move forward with, and the council adopted those. So before I go into the specific projects themselves, as you can see by this map, the green boxes are where the parks are located, and the purple lines are for specific trail segments that are on the bottom. One thing that's important to note out is that these parks are kind of spread out throughout the city. And what that's doing is that's providing access, hopefully walkable access within 15 minutes of the house for thousands of Dunwoody residents to be able to conveniently walk to a city park, which is a big benefit. I think the other thing that was important with the parks projects, it wasn't just putting out parks, but it was also putting amenities into those parks that the city currently does not have. So it wasn't just let's take Brook Run and do a clone everywhere across the city. It was like, what amenities do the residents want that we currently do not offer? So what I'll do is I'll move to this real quick. So the first one up here is we have softball fields. You can see there is not a dot going down there yet. Part of the bond referendum is for the acquisition of green space, and that was specifically for the softball complex. Softball actually originally, so Wildcat Park is an old Austin site. It's been renamed Wildcat. We originally had planned on putting softball fields there, but there were some site limitations. We really couldn't fit in an appropriately sized softball complex there. So after talking with the local neighbors and the softball community, we decided best to find a home for softball outside of that. And so we redesigned that, and I'll get to Wildcat in a second. The city is actively working on finding a location. We can't announce that until a deal has been set, but all of that will be done in a public forum, so there will be nothing behind closed doors. Everything will be public and transparent. But we were planning to build a softball complex. The second part is Wildcat Park. As I said, that's the old Austin school site up on Roberts Drive. What the plan is for that park is a multi-use field lined for lacrosse, but with tick marks for the other sports. There will be tennis courts and pickleball courts there. There will be a grass field in the back, just an open play field. Non-structured, non-programmed, throw a frisbee, fly a kite, all the fun things like that. There will be a 50-foot splash pad. There will be a playground and a couple of half-court basketball courts. And there will be a soft surface walking trail through the woods around the park. So that is Wildcat Park. The third park is Homecoming Park. That is the park on Vermac Drive that the city recently acquired. The intention for that was to preserve the green space as much as we can and keep that a passive park. So you can see pretty much all of this green space, and I know it's a small picture and people are far away, but the only thing we're going to be doing there is just doing some soft surface natural trails through the woods. There is, again, another large open grass play field, unprogrammed, unstructured. There are some pickleball courts there. There will be a pavilion. We're leaving the house. It was a former residence. We're removing one structure, we're leaving the house, and originally the intent was to make that a Parks and Rec field office, but the discussion now has been, that's going to be a community available, so if you have a bridge club, scouts, you want to have a community meeting, that will be available for residents to use. And then the other feature at this park, which I think is really important, is we're doing an 88th century playground. So for children with special needs, that is not something that we have. That is something that we desperately need. I think that, and I think this is a great location for that due to it being a passive park. So those are the projects at Homecoming. The fourth park is Waterford Park. That is an existing park. What we're going to be doing there is an 8-acre park. We're going to, we've already refurbished the tennis courts and the pavilion there. We're going to be adding a playground. And it's basically 8 acres of green space that's being preserved. There'll be some soft surface nature trails through the woods there. Those trails will connect to 2 neighborhoods. The plan is to connect it to Kingsley and to connect it to Kings Glen, which will connect to some of the neighborhoods off of Happy Hollow. And the purpose of that is to, again, give convenient walking access to much more Dunwoody residents to be able to walk to a city park. So there was a little bit of concern with that. Well, with one of the other neighborhoods, Brook Farm was also initially planned to be connected. They did not want to be connected, so we said, okay, we're not connecting. So that's not happening. We listened to the residents there. And then the fourth park is Brook Run Park. So we did a major build out at Brook Run Park a couple of years ago. That was phase 1. We have a plan for phase 2. Our phase 2 was initially much more ambitious, but I think that the feeling was when we finished phase 1, we kind of took a step back and said Brook Run is kind of in its happy place. We don't want to over-program one park, we don't put everything in one place. It would get too busy, it would get run down, so we're doing very little in phase 2. Basically the plan is to put in a bathroom, which isn't very sexy, but it's important when you need it. And that's going to go back by the dog park and the community garden. It's certainly something that's in need there. We're going to do a picnic pavilion over in the area near Treetop Quest. So if you enter Brook Run through the Peeler Road entrance, there will be a picnic pavilion there. And there will be a beach volleyball court. And that's it at Brook Run. So those are the 5 park projects. Before I move on to trails, are there any questions on the parks?
Roughly how much money is involved if you were to separate the parks from the trails? Because those sound good, the parks. How much money is involved in that estimated? Do you have any idea?
I don't, if memory serves me right, I think it was about 35 million for parks, 25 for the trails, was the estimate. And that's a good question because I think it's important to realize that we didn't start with, hey, let's do a $60 million bond and figure out what we can build with it. We started with the projects. We got estimates on what these projects that were prioritized by the committee and what it would cost, and that's how the $60 million was kind of came up with. So that's where that number came with. So yeah, good question. Yes.
Will the Wildcat Park, Homecoming Park, Wildcat. Will those trails interconnect with the nature center?
Not directly. There are some plans to do some connections to the nature center from there, but that there's conflict that involves going across some Georgia Power right away and some other backyard neighborhoods. The Dunwoody Nature Center was actively working on that on their own to work with the neighbors to get that agreement. That is not a part of this project. But that would certainly be something I think, if achievable, would be a goal the city would want to do in the future.
And do the sidewalks connect to like Dunwoody Village?
Yeah, so that's a good segue. Any more park questions? Yeah, but I'll get to I'll answer that in just a second.
How many acres do you need for softball complex?
I do not know that number off the top of my head.
Tom, you're showing a picture of one, or we thinking?
No, there's actually a second field back here. It's just
Okay,
very
so
small.
you got 2.
There'll be 2 softball fields. I believe it was Robert's 9 acres, and so I don't know the answer of what it takes to do that. I think in the sites that we're looking at, that like about 10 acres was considered about the right size to do that, to allow for the 2 fields, the batting cages, and some agri parking. So that was, I believe it was 10 acres is what we're looking at as a number for that. Yes?
Can you take the square for Homecoming Park and just at least tell me, I can't see it from here, where would Vermac be on that, or turn the box so it fits?
So this is Homecoming or Vermac, right? So this is Vermac, this is Womack, Vermac, and Chambly Dunwoody.
Fair.
So it's right up from the
can you tell me where Vermac is
Oh,
on that?
this one, it's Homecoming Park.
I'm sorry, Homecoming Park.
Yes, yeah. But it's on Vermac. It was called Homecoming, yes.
So Vermac would be on the left.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so, right, oh, yes.
Sorry, just one last question. So what study, or has there been a study on impact to the wildlife?
So, back to wild, so most of these we're really not doing, because this is, Wildcat was the site of the school, the area that's cleared is essentially the area that's already cleared. So we're not clearing any vegetation. There will probably be a tree or two, obviously, and we don't have that. That'll be done as the final construction documents are done. And the same thing with Homecoming Park. We're not, we're leaving all of those trees in place. We're not taking those down. We're not doing any tree removal at Waterford, and I don't believe it's necessary at Brook Run either. So there's really going to be minimal impact there. I don't know if there's a specific wildlife study, to be honest with you. Yes, sir.
To be fair, I think that at Waterford, there probably would be some trees removed if it's connected, unless you're truly going to
Maybe
somehow.
for the trails, maybe.
There might be a couple, we have to get a bridge across the creek there. So there might be a couple in order to put, because we can't build like an Eagle Scout project bridge, it's got to meet certain structural standards, especially since it's in a floodplain. So we have to build it to a certain quality level, an engineering level. There may be some removed there, but in the trail, the intent is to keep it a soft surface so that it can meander around the existing trees. Some undergrowth will probably be removed, but the goal will be to protect it. Because we're not putting concrete down, the roots and everything else should be protected, so there should be an impact environmentally.
I think you also have to consider the lighting. The LED lights are terrible for wildlife. So, I mean, that's going to be a factor in every single one of these park projects.
That's a fair question. And so one thing to point out too is that, so we have preliminary plans for all of these. Some people have asked why not final construction plans. There's a couple reasons for that. The first is, to be quite honest, there's no money to build these parks if the bond doesn't pass. So no sense spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on plans for something we may not be able to construct. The other reason for that is also that if the bond is approved, we can use bond proceeds to pay for those construction documents. So we won't be using operational funds to pay for plans. We'll be using bond proceeds to pay for the plans. So with that, since those construction documents are not finalized at this point, each one of these projects will come before the city council for a final approval. And as with all of our projects, there will be the opportunity for public input and comments that we will consider. And so certainly the light is a very good question. Yes.
Another question, you said 35 million roughly for parks. Where does the money come from for the purchase of the land for softball fields? It was clear to me that you said building out softball fields would be the bond. What is the source of money?
It's the bond. It's the bond. So the bond question is for up to $60 million for parks, green space, and trails. So it allows for the acquisition of green space to construct the softball complex.
But so you're saying the plan is we would, from bond money, we would buy land and we would develop land for softball fields?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
The bond question has the word acquisition in it.
Yeah. Okay, I'll move on to the trail segment here. And one thing I do want to make clear is that there are 4 specific trail segments on here. As John kind of talked about, trails are a little bit of a divisive issue. And we did our master trail plan kind of at the same time that we're coming up with these projects, so you can kind of understand how they got commingled a little bit in people's minds. But the bond is only funding 4 specific trail plans. The first is what's called the Village Crossroads Project. And that goes from Womack by the library and the art center, up Chamblee Dunwoody through the Dunwoody Village, up to Roberts Drive. The plan is to continue that all the way up to Austin School and Wildcat Park, but as far as the bond, the city can only commit to doing that portion of it. One thing I want to talk about is that every trail segment is unique and different. I know John raised a concern about 12-foot trails, but not all of these are going to be 12-foot trails. They're going to be designed specifically for where they're going to fit in best. So for example, the Village Crossroads project is going to have 8-foot wide sidewalks with a 5-foot buffer, which will have trees and street lighting on it, followed by a 4-foot, what's called a cycle track, then a 2-foot buffer, all of that elevated off of the street and then the road there. And the reason for doing that, there's two reasons. The idea for the village is everybody wants Dunwoody Village to be our downtown, our walkable gathering spot. And so the idea is we want to make it as pedestrian friendly as possible. And so separating the bicycles from the pedestrians made sense. In an area where we hopefully have a lot of pedestrians and maybe stopping to look in a shop window or something like that, it made sense to separate the pedestrians from the bicycles. The other reason for doing that is there are a lot of driveways and curb cuts through the village. And drivers are creatures of habit. If you're making a right-hand turn, you tend to come out, look to the left, and then just make your turn. You don't always look to the right. And if you have two-way bicycle traffic on a trail, that presents the opportunity for conflict. So the cycle tracks are one way in the same direction as car traffic on each side of the road. And that makes it safer for the cyclists, and it makes it safer for the cars as well. So that's the reason why that is designed as it is. So, and there are other amenities there to make it easier to cross from the shops of Dunwoody to Dunwoody Village proper. But if there's specific questions that we can go over that, and all the plans are on the website. The second project is Mount Vernon. Basically from Williamsburg Shopping Center to the Dunwoody Village. That would be the plans to have that on the north side of Mount Vernon. 2/3 of that is already in preliminary engineering, and Public Works has been working on that. The final third is conceptual. We have not reviewed plans for that yet. That would be basically from around St. Luke's down to the village itself. So, but that would be on the north side. Kind of the idea is, and again, I know these are hard to see, but basically the idea would be a 5-foot buffer. And that buffer again would have trees and lighting as available, and then a 12-foot multi-use trail. But again, that 12-foot is not set in stone. It could be 10, it could be 8, depending on the area. Once you get below 8 and you're at 6 foot, well, now you're a sidewalk and not really a trail. So yes.
What was the starting point? I couldn't hear you.
Williamsburg, so Jet Ferry down to the village. Yeah. So East 48th Street, Delaware.
I missed Williamsburg.
Yeah. Yes.
Are you going to be adding benches and things like that? Because I know one of my next door neighbors is an old man who walks a lot, and I find him sitting like on electrical boxes out there and stuff.
That's a good question. I don't know if that's in there. We did when they did the Dunwoody Village Parkway, they did put park benches there, but that was a little bit of a different situation. I don't know that there will be benches included in that. I know there was standard trash cans and benches in the trail plan for us to use, kind of ideas for that. But we have not since we're not at the final stage, I don't know. And that might be an issue also. So for example, this section here really isn't impacting any residential properties. It's going through a commercial area, so there's no impact. This will have more impact on residential properties, so we're going to be much more sensitive. So that might not be a place to have benches or something like that. But in the commercial area, I would say absolutely there would be benches.
Well, I can tell you as a representative of the park committee, where there are currently fences and houses don't look straight out to it, we would love to put some covered type of benches there.
Yes.
We feel very strongly that it's getting too hot these days. Too hot these days that there needs to be some cover and some shade, but done in an artistic manner. We would love to do that.
Yeah, that sounds great. And hopefully we can incorporate that into the plans when we move forward. That's good to know. The third segment, I'm going to skip over to here. This is Winters Chapel Road. We just completed phase 1. This is phase 2. Phase 1 was basically from the border with the city, Dunwoody Club Drive, Sandy Springs border, down to Charmont. That'll continue that all the way down through to Peeler Road, which is where the Walmart, where the shopping and the retail is. So all of these neighborhoods would have connections to that. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that when I first started, that the trails, the reason why these 4 specific trail segments were selected is because they got people to destinations. They got a lot of Dunwoody residents to specific destinations, the village, other shopping, retail. So that's phase 2 of Winters Chapel. And then the final segment is something that everyone here should know very well, North Peachtree Road, basically coming in from 285 up to Brook Run Park. The main reason is this is selected is not only connecting to Brook Run, but there are 2 schools, Chestnut and Peachtree Middle School there. There are a lot of students that walk there to those schools. We've heard a lot of concern from residents, particularly in this neighborhood going north and also the apartments nearby about the safety, so we're trying to address that and give those students a safe way to get to school. It's also, the added bonus is it's another gateway to the city and connects to Brook Run Park, but really the idea is for safety for the kids walking. Yes?
Well, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, the safety issue is crossing Marquette Street for the kids. So how does the trail address that?
Well, Matt, please.
Yeah.
In the city budget, we are doing a hawk crossing, so in the next, well, we're gonna hopefully approve the budget very soon, and then there's gonna be a new lighting system right in front of Chestnut, which will hopefully improve the stoppability of cars. So that's coming in that's not part of this bond referendum. So that lighting system in front of Chestnut is coming in this year and should improve that aspect.
And the hawk is
the first one.
If you've been by Chamblee High School, it's the mast arm that goes across with the flashing lights.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so one of the ways you increase the safety of, so for example here you can look, there's a big section of shoulder that's currently unused, and not only is it unused, but it also makes the road wider. The wider the road is, there's mental things, people tend to drive faster. So if you shrink that distance, if you take away that unused space and actually use it for the trail and the green space, not only are you getting a more functional road there, there's research that shows when there's trees on the side of the road, people drive slower. Because there's a consequence if I go off the road, you know. So, and also what you do is you shrink the width of the road at the key crossing points to make it safer. And then you can do the crosswalks, the flashing beacon as John talked about. One of the things I hope that comes out of this is over down by Dunwoody Village Apartments, we actually have those 4 lanes there and by the Baptist Church. I don't think there's any need for those extra lanes. Get rid of those, now you take a 4-lane road and push it down to 2. It makes it a lot safer if those students want to cross at a signalized traffic light at that location. So there are a lot of engineering things you can do to make it safer to cross, and those will all be a part of this.
And we will definitely need to have engineering done, because right now, initial thoughts from the city staff is that this trail would be on the west side, would be on the other side, would be on the school side of the street, which to me, if you were to, I want to know how many walkers are on each side, and how many are going to use it, and if the apartments are going to have to cross at the apartment complex to get over, and Brookhaven's going to have to cross to get over, how many crossings are you going to have for a majority of the students to use that sidewalk? So I have to look at it, engineering, I want traffic, I want pedestrian counts, I want to understand why staff has said that side of the road versus this side, so that's an issue that I sort of have.
Which trail is that, John? I'm sorry.
That's North Beach Street.
Yeah.
I believe the initial idea for putting it on the west side was that it affects far fewer homes. There are only 6 houses there, and then also the schools and the park are on that side of the road. But again, we have not gone into engineering, so right now it's speculative. Hopefully there will be options for us to evaluate, and perhaps it does end up on the other side. I don't know, but I think the key thing is if you can kind of slow down that traffic and get those safer crossing areas, that's the key thing for the students there. So yes.
This may be kind of premature, but if the bond did not pass this time around, then what of these things, if people like aspects of this but not this entire plan, what is contingent?
Like what's funded?
So, the short answer is I can't answer that for you because we do not have a surplus of $60 million that we can build. What we would have to do is, to be honest with you, probably the casualty would be the parks because some of the trail segments we could use SPLOST money to build some of those segments, but SPLOST money we can't use for the parks. So we would have to find a source of funding for those parks that isn't there right now. And to give an example, we've gotten very creative in the parks that we've built to date in the city. We've taken advantage of kind of one-time opportunities. So Brook Run, the build out there, $4 million that was from the DeKalb County Parks Bond. Before the city incorporated DeKalb County into the Parks Bond, they promised to do improvements at Brook Run, so they were obligated to provide that money to the city. So we had to kind of fight in the court to get it, but we did. Brook Run would not have been possible without that Park Bond money. Well, the baseball fields, again, was a part of a land swap with the school system, and there was money involved there, and that's really complicated. But we took advantage of that. The recently completed Two Bridges Park over in the perimeter area, CARES Act funding was used for that because we had initially planned to build that park with hotel tax, but when COVID hit and shut down the hotels, that source of revenue went away. So we were able to justify using CARES money to build out that park. So we've been creative in using opportunities that were there, but sooner or later you run out of those opportunities. So there isn't really a lot of options, quite honestly. Yes?
I have a question. So the segment of trail that's up there, the far right, the one that you're talking about.
Winter Chapel.
So what is happening to Peeler, if anything? Like, I'm just trying to figure out how that connects to anything else.
So this goes all the way up to the city border up there, like the phase 1 part, and this is where all the commercial is, the Walmart, the restaurants, and all of that kind of stuff. There is a plan that's not a part of the bond, so I don't want to confuse people, but there is a plan to have a trail go from Winter's Chapel down to Wynwood Hollow Park. So that would connect again to a city park and some of the residents along this way. That's currently been funded with SPLOST money, not a part of the bond. So again, I just don't want people to commingle things and get confused. But that's independent of this. But there is a plan to continue that down to the
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out how they.
And didn't they build out the trail in front of the reservoir already?
So there is a what's called a linear park or a sidewalk that when DeKalb County Waterworks did that when they put in the wall and all of that stuff there. Yeah. Yes.
From
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You're looking at, from what I understand, because I talked to Joe Secretary earlier today about just this bond issue and what happens if the bond doesn't pass. From what I understand, the trails, for instance, by Dunwoody Village, that trail will still be built out, but it might lose things. Like, for instance, he said if we have a bond, the electrical cables will be buried along that. Which I don't know if there's consensus on that, but there are things like these amenities that, on that trail section that the bond can, I guess improve. Like, we might still be able to build some trails, but it won't be the same as.
So we have federal funding right now. We've gotten grants through the ARC of some federal money to help us with Dunwoody Village and Winter's Chapel. There's about $6.25 million assigned to this, and about $1 million to this project. Federal money always has strings attached. The two biggest strings from the city's perspective is there's always some sort of local match. We have to put money in that does not pay for the whole project. So we have to put in local money to do that. And so basically the idea of putting these on those, and then there's also the second string is time. There's a time that you have to construct this project within a certain time frame or you lose the money. So the Dunwoody Village project in particular is pretty costly just because there's a lot of moving parts to it. And so being able to fund that with the bond, the only other source of revenue would be really SPLOST funds, but that's where the majority of our paving comes from. So it would kind of be taking away from other things the city might want to get done to finish that project, or potentially risk losing the federal money. I think we would find a way to get it done, but yeah.
To me, those little things like buried wires make a big difference.
It does. It's very expensive. So there is a cost estimate for burying utilities through the village. There was one for the entire segment, and there was one just through the village proper. When those final plans come up to us, that'll be something that the council will discuss and evaluate if that is.
I don't know if that's actually good.
They're very expensive to bury cables, and I'm not sure based on the bond referendum question where it's not part of paving trails and all this. I'm not sure we can include the burying of the cables. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not sure.
Right.
Again, burying electrical lines is very, very expensive. We've looked at it a number of times. As much as I would have loved to have done it, we're talking $1 million for an intersection, $1 million lift. So it's
yeah. I think the initial cost is like between $4 to $8 million to bury the utilities for the village. So it's not cheap. Yes.
And that's why they didn't do that in Chambly Dunwoody on that, right? Because not only does it add to the length to get the project done, but then the financial feasibility.
It's very expensive. Yeah, Max.
Tom, are you going to speak to the Peeler Road SPLOST project on the next slide?
I am not, because it's not a part of the bond, but.
Okay, so let me just ask this then, since we're not going to speak to that. That SPLOST project, that's independent of the bond.
Correct.
Any estimate as to what that number looks like, or how much we're spending from the corner of Winter's Chapel to go into Peeler to the little park there?
I don't have that number off the top of my head. It's in the capital improvement plan. It's actually a part of the city budget. So I think it was 1.25 is the number I had in my head, but I could be wrong. So
okay.
There's a lot of numbers out there right now. I don't want to misrepresent anything.
That's fine, it's a seven-figure number, and low seven-figure number. And then when that stops, there's still a gap between our gym, Brook Run, and the Reservoir Park, which is lovely, so that people have to walk across Peeler, which I don't know if any of y'all have ever done that before, but I lived there.
Yeah.
And I'm still alive, so it's good. And then they have to walk across on the other side to get to the park and enjoy this short run trail that goes up to an intersection. At the top end of the project there was at Mount Vernon. Where does it end? That blue line to the far east.
Top or bottom?
This one?
Yeah, we're in.
Yeah. So this goes all the way up to the, we've already finished the phase one from, basically it takes you right to the city border with Sandy Springs at Dunwoody Club.
And that's Dunwoody Club.
And it currently ends at Charmont. It would take it from Charmont all the way down. And the good thing, again, I believe there are 5 houses, and then most of that area is the cemetery and some commercial properties.
So that's the part that really puzzles me, because you're building this dogleg segment that essentially goes to a very small park. It leads out the big park, and it ends at an intersection on the top end. Now, I'd love to see that node grow and be a delightful place to have a cappuccino, but that's not in the cards for the time being. And I'm not sure how a trail would help develop that.
There are a lot of residents in Fontainebleau and Lockridge Forest and Mayfair that walk want to walk down to the Walmart down there into the
There's
restaurants.
existing sidewalks on both sides, right?
There's not. So, and it is not safe. So the idea is to connect them down to that. So, the cemetery, and this one, So, there's nothing on the sidewalk we're putting in. There's nothing currently there.
There's nothing on the Walmart side, in other words. There's sidewalk on the other side.
No, on the cemetery side, there's not.
There's no sidewalk.
There might be down by the gas station, and there's a warehouse there. There's not anything in front of the cemetery or along the cemetery or connecting up to where we ended the project. There's currently nothing there. So, yes.
To follow on that, so for the roads that have the blue lines there, do most of those roads have sidewalks currently? And do many of them have sidewalks on both sides in those blue sections?
No. Mount Vernon does have some sidewalks.
On the north side. Mount Vernon has a sidewalk on the north side.
Yeah. There is sidewalks on the east, but not on the west of North Peachtree, to mine.
There's part of it.
No, they're down by the church, and right in front of the school itself. Yeah, there's nothing here, and there is some here, but again, the intent with the Dunwoody Village is everyone wants that to be the downtown and create that walkability there. So we're hoping the intention is if the city invests in the infrastructure, that everything that people are wanting for the Dunwoody Village to become will incent the development there.
Now, I'm hearing you say for the Winter Chapel Park, there's no sidewalks. I'm hearing this gentleman say there is.
I'm not one to walk up Winter's Chapel away from the Walmart, so I can't say that there are sidewalks on both sides. I don't want to be misled by that.
I can speak to that. We rented from there while we were having our house worked on, and we were staying on the east side, and I've got 4 kids. There were not sidewalks for portions of it, and it was our entertainment to walk up to the dollar store. And I don't know. There were 4 young kids, so it's what we did. And then on the east side of it, I'm not kidding, I felt like a mama duck, with her little baby duck, single file, and the sidewalk was right next to it, and it was thinner than 4 feet even. And it was rocky, and it was right next to the road, and there's no bike lane either, so literally the cars are like zipping, and we live in the same area. Peeler sucks for speeding, and so does Winter's Chapel.
Yeah, Winter's Chapel.
And they are like blowing by with no bike lane, and literally the sidewalk, like this 3-foot, like beat up sidewalk, kissing that road. It was Frogger meets dollar store.
And to back that up, I have a special needs child, and I like to walk my dog, and my guy has to go behind us. It is, to your point, so scary to have your children behind you because there's no other way to do it. They won't fit. And I'm on Dunwoody Club and you're not planning anything there, but gosh, I wish it was in front of my house, let me tell you. I would be all about it, and I know it would help the sale of my house in the future. So I'm for it, knowing what it's like for me in my life of having a special needs son. It's life-saving, especially with younger kids.
North Peachtree has sidewalks on both sides.
Yeah.
On both sides, with a bike lane on both sides. The sidewalks are relatively thin.
Yes.
I would think on the east side, you're lucky to get 4 feet.
Right, right. And with a wall right there too. Yeah.
There's just, they're on both sides.
Yes.
Yeah, let me just ask, what is your timeline for the trails, and specifically the ones near, on North Peachtree and the one up near Austin, because of the traffic and the school and things like that, like when hypothetically you would construct it, because that, not only, so I live in that Dunwoody North neighborhood, this neighborhood, and, you know, there's obviously a lot of like traffic that ends up like, you know, rush hour where people are cutting through
Right.
our neighborhood and stuff, and I could just see that being a real kind of cluster, you know.
So we do our best to try and time our projects around, so an example is we were putting a new ADA compliant trail in front of the high school. And we actually broke that project up into 2 segments so that it could be constructed during the summer when school was out. It would have been easier to do it all at once, but we weren't able to finish it before school started, so we broke it into the 2 segments to minimize the impact on it. And we will hopefully do that with all of these projects. Sometimes there might be factors that
We did the same thing with Chambly, Dunwoody.
yes, we try to time the projects to minimize the impact to the greatest of our sense. Talk about timeline. The good news, and I'm going to segue into the bond 101 portion in a second. The benefit of the bond is we get the funding up front, so we can start construction immediately rather than waiting over time. I can't give you an exact timeline, but what
It is in phase 2 though. North Peachtree's in phase 2. There's 2 phases, right? There's phase 1, phase 2, and North Peachtree hasn't been engineered at all, what others have done.
Right, so my best estimation would be that the park, basically it's gonna take about a year to get the construction documents, the engineering done, go through city council approval, all of that stuff. Everything is kind of queued up, especially for the parks project, so if the bond is approved November 8th, we hit the ground, staff is ready to hit the ground running. The intent would hopefully to be able to start construction by the end of 2024, maybe rolling into 2025. But again, that's because we had to go through all the approval and the construction and the construction planning. The trails will take a little longer just by nature. They're much more challenging. There's sometimes the right of way acquisition. There's utilities that have to be relocated. Stormwater. By their nature, they take a little longer. Those will probably be several years to get completed. I can't give you an accurate timeline.
You also work with every homeowner.
Yeah, exactly. So, let me segue into the bond 101 portion because I think this is important too. So, I think it's important to point out because a lot of people have asked why bond, and there's a little bit of the fear of the unknown because the city of Dunwoody has never issued a bond, and I think is this something that is strange? The fact of the matter is 70% of all local government projects nationwide are funded with municipal bonds. And I just wanted to point out that these are just a few of the neighbors of Dunwoody that have recently, and these are just parks and trails bonds. These are some of our neighbors that have done in recent years parks and trails bonds. So this is how local governments and government in general funds capital projects. The best analogy I can use is it's kind of the same as us as individuals wanting to buy a house. Most of us don't have that cash sitting around. So we take out a mortgage, we spread out the payments over several years, and that makes the house affordable for us. We can buy it today. Kind of the same thing with a bond. But the benefit of a bond, as opposed to traditional financing, is the interest rates are much lower. And they're also tax exempt, so that it provides some additional savings to the city. Some people have said, why not just pay as you go, save up the money? And the reason for that is it always ends up costing more money because building cost inflation far outpaces the cost of financing. And the rates that we will get on the bond are fixed and locked in year one, whereas building cost inflation compounds over time. The other reason why the pay-as-you-go method doesn't really work well is that you're setting aside a portion of tax revenue every year to pay for a project that you hope to build maybe 8, 10 years, whatever it might be. So that money, if I'm a taxpayer, a portion of my taxes are just getting set aside for a benefit that I may never see. So using a bond spreads that payment out over time so that the people that are the beneficiaries of the projects you're building are also shared equally in the cost of those projects. So that's why cities use bonds as a primary method. Another concern I've heard raised is, why are we doing this now? Interest rates are at an all-time high, and that's not actually true. I understand why people think that. This chart here just kind of shows municipal bond index since the turn of the century, so 2000 to right now. So we're here. So yes, we all know what this was. This was COVID, right? That was a historical low. Interest rates were lower, but I think probably most people would agree that would not be the time to issue a bond just because of economic uncertainty. So the rates have come up since COVID, but as you can see from a historical perspective, they're still very favorable. We expect to get an interest rate somewhere in the 4 to 4.5% range. And once again, that'll be fixed. So once we get that, that's locked in. If for some reason rates drop again, if it makes sense, the city could, just like refinancing a mortgage, we could reissue the bonds. But that would only be done if it makes financial sense, if there was significant savings to doing that. Another point about the bond is the bond is authorized up to $60 million. That's what we're asking the voters to approve up to. We don't have to spend the full $60 million. So if these projects could be delivered for $55 million, we would only issue $55 million worth of bonds. So, and it's not all issued at once. It'll be, the bonds will be issued in tranches as we need the funds. So, and there's additional savings by doing it that way as well, because you're not paying interest on money that's just kind of sitting on the side and waiting. Yes?
Can you talk about a little bit about how does the city account for any of the funds? How does the audit process work? Like what transparency will I have as a citizen?
Yes. So there's actually 3 levels of checks and balances with the bond. The first is just city policy. Every expenditure of the city is independently audited without exception. So all the bond funds will be audited by an independent auditor. So funds will be audited. In addition to that audit, the city, when they issue the bonds, they do not receive the money directly. That money is actually deposited with the bond trustee. That bond trustee is appointed and approved by the bond holders. Independent, it's an independent, separate from the city. The city does not get that money until we submit verification to that bond trustee, and they verify that the money that we are asking for is for approved projects. So the bond trustee verifies all of that. And then the final checks and balances, the city is agreed to put an open checkbook specific to bond projects, so basically a bond ledger sheet on the website. So at any time, if you want to see what we spent as of today on the bond, you could go, you could look at all of those expenses will be listed out for people to verify. So there's actually 3 levels of checks and balances as far as an audit. So yeah, so that's kind of covered. But it's good. That's a really good question. Anything else on the bond itself? I think it's again. I just wanted people to understand that it's not yes.
Sorry, I'm just trying to be explicit as possible. Where exactly does the fund come from? Like the bond is provided by whom?
People buy it.
So we go on the market. People buy municipal bonds. They're a very stable investment. You know, they're lower interest rates, but they're very stable because, in essence, what a city does to issue a municipal bond is they pledge their full taxing authority to repay those bonds. So they're very stable. The default rate is yeah.
On the graph, can you just explain to me what the blue line and is it yellow line, what those mean, or is there a purpose for those?
I think it's just showing this is at 3%. Right here, and this is where we are currently, which I think is at 3.67. The last time I checked was what the municipal bond rate is. Again, if the bond is approved, the expectation is those bonds will be issued. The first round of bonds will be issued in March of 2024 because we have to go and get a credit rating and go through the process of issuing those bonds. And our bond council is estimating that at that time the interest rate will be somewhere between 4 and 4.5%.
Does that include any kind of premium, the fact that we can have on or budget might be?
So Yes, the bond, a lot of it will be dependent on the bond rating, because, so the expectation is that the city will either be AAA or AA plus. The thing that might knock us down to AA plus is the fact that we've never issued bonds before. So much like if you've never taken out credit before, your FICO score goes a little bit lower. So, but our bond council seems very confident that we'll either be AAA or AA plus. But until that we go to market, I can't say what that'll be with any certainty. So, which should give us those rates that we're anticipating. So, any other questions on that? Okay.
The final term was 20 years, up to 60, over 20. Is that did I read that correctly?
Correct, yes. It's a 20-year term bond is what the city's planning to do. You could do it in 10, 20, or 30 year, but 20 year was the issuance that made the most sense. Okay, so the final question is, what is this going to cost you? And I know that's important to everybody. So what this pie graph indicates is where your taxes go, your property taxes. For the average Dunwoody homeowner, and that's based on a home value of $500,000. And this was calculated at an interest rate of 5%, just to be clear. So it's possible it will be lower than this. The cost for the bond will be an additional $157 a year. To see how that fits onto your tax bill, this pie graph, the blue section is DeKalb County schools. The orange and gray are DeKalb County government operations. The yellow portion is the city portion, which, just for perspective, is 4.4% of the typical homeowner. If the bond is approved, that's the light blue section there. It would account for 2.3% of your total property tax bill. So that's how it breaks down. So $157. It's important. Yes.
So earlier, I think you mentioned that we're not obligated to take all 60 million of the bond at once.
Correct.
So if I could make a scenario, let's say the first year we pull 25 million out. So we're only paying interest on the 25. That 157 is 25, we would pay 25%. So the tax increase would be $30. I'm trying to make a parallel.
Right, so this assumes issuing all $60 million in year one. If it's issued in tranches, this number could go down. If there's other savings, this number could go down. If we don't issue the full $60 million, that number could go down. If the tax size on commercial properties increases, this number could go down. So one thing, since I just said that, let me make clear. So the Tony tax digest is roughly 30% single-family homes, the only homeowners, about 70% commercial. The commercial is made up of multifamily apartments, of retail, and of office space, and they are paying. We in Dunwoody we're fortunate. We pay the lowest tax rate in all of DeKalb County, at 3.04 mils, and actually the effective tax rate is actually only 2.04 mils because there's a 1 mil exemption for Dunwoody homeowners. In addition to that, the assessment on your home is frozen. So basically, when we incorporate it, or if you purchase your house after when you purchase your house. So if you bought a $400,000 house and it is now worth $800,000 house, the amount you pay in city taxes is on that $400 assessment. So if your property value goes up, you do not pay more in city taxes as a Dunwoody homeowner. So yes.
So the chart portrays the taxes on a county-wide basis. And since we're only talking about the city of Dunwoody, why don't we portray how much the bond increase of $157 will be as a part of our city taxes, which is currently $298 on that chart.
Okay, so this isn't county-wide, this is actually a Dunwoody home. This is your total. People don't send out a separate property tax bill for city and for county. You pay one property tax bill. You have one property tax. So this is the breakdown of your percentage. If you want to break it down into percentages, certainly, but I think if you told people that it was a 50% tax increase, I think if I'm writing a $6,000 property tax, a 50% increase would suggest to me that now I'm paying $9,000, and I think that's a little.
But there are a number of people in the city of Dunwoody who pay no school taxes. So for a large percent of our population, to confuse the issue with school taxes and other county-wide taxes, not the city taxes. We're talking about city bonds and city operations.
Right. Well, everybody pays the county taxes because that's just part of you get one property tax bill. You don't get separate bills. So this is how that property tax You could certainly, listen, you could interpret things differently, and, but this is how it breaks down. I think it's important to note that, as I stated, Dunwoody pays the lowest tax rate in all of Wildcat County. If the bond is approved, Dunwoody homeowners will still pay the lowest tax rate in all of Wildcat County, even with the additional millage attached. And I think that's worth noting. So, unincorporated Wildcat County currently pays 5.5 mils more than Dunwoody in taxes. And when you consider our entire millage is 3.04, that's pretty significant. So, I think I'm going to get off, like I said, facts, my opinion here. I think the city of Dunwoody have been good stewards of the taxpayers' money. I think they do a lot, provide a lot of services for a very minimal tax base. I could probably visit our neighboring cities and you tell them you're paying $290 in city taxes, they will choke because they're paying a lot more than that in their cities. So we do have a relatively low tax rate. And yeah, if you want to play the percentage game, when you have a low number, percentages are bigger when you add numbers to that. So, but this is just an accurate portrayal of the typical Dunwoody homeowner's property tax.
As our former mayor said, low taxes is not sin.
I'm sorry?
As our former mayor said, low taxes is not a sin.
It's not a sin when you're paying low taxes. So I don't disagree with that statement. So, are there any questions on this portion of it?
Take that $157, and a lot of times you hear mill thrown around, and it's about a mill, roughly. If every home in Dunwoody, say, doubled in price or halved in price, what would change? Would everyone still be on the hook for 157, or if all the house values doubled, would the 157 double, or would it stay the same?
So your assessment's frozen. So if your house value goes up, this number won't change because there'll be a millage. There'll be a separate millage on your tax bill that'll say something like City of Dunwoody Park bond or whatever the tax commission decides to label it on your bill. And there will be a millage assigned to that. This is based on an anticipated millage of 1.049 mils. But it's very possible that could be 0.9 mils, which would reduce that number. But we tried to be conservative with this number. Again, this is calculated at a 5% interest rate on the bond and issuing all $60 million at once. I'm sorry, did I answer the question?
I don't know if I have a clear way to phrase what I'm saying where.
So a mill is basically 1,000. Yeah.
Right. I understand the mill part. It's just if I'm going to say let's say
the next guy might pay.
Okay.
Yes.
So is it when the county or when the city assesses this, is it assessing a millage rate?
There will be an additional millage rate on your tax bill to fill the debt. That will only be there until the debt is retired. So if it's a 20-year issuance, in 20 years that millage will go away.
Okay.
Or sooner if the debt is retired before then.
And I know you said like we may not issue all at one time.
Right.
But let's just say we did 60 million in one shot just to make it easier.
Mm-hmm.
Would that millage rate be fixed?
It will fluctuate year to year. It is likely to come down because historically the tax digest goes up. And so for example, I mentioned that our tax digest is about 30% homeowner, which is fixed on assessment value, and 70% commercial. That commercial tends to go up. There are a few times it dips down, but over time it goes up. The commercial rates are not fixed. So as their assessments go up, they will actually be paying a larger portion of this, the commercial properties. So the Dunwoody homeowners are really only footing about 30% of the bill for the bond, and the commercial properties are carrying about 70%. I've heard some people say that's not fair to the commercial properties, but what we've heard from the commercial properties are that these are amenities that they want because they see the economic development impact of that. And additionally, they're paying that same 3.04 mils, which is the lowest that they pay anywhere else. They're already paying a low tax rate being in Dunwoody. If they move to another city, they'd be paying higher taxes anyway. So did I look like I might have confused you by saying
yeah. If the values go up, you're going to pay more.
Yeah.
So the value's going to go up. They'll be paying more over time. I think.
Yeah. So if the value of the commercial properties goes up, they will pay more money, which would actually, in effect, reduce the amount that the Dunwoody homeowners are paying. So let's say this is all based on a millage rate of 1.049 mils, but if the commercial digest goes up, that the millage rate assigned to Dunwoody homeowners may drop to 0.9 mils. So that means that number goes down to.
Okay, so the millage rate's not fixed.
Correct.
Okay, all right, I think that's what I was
Yes.
leaning at when I started.
Yes.
It's not fixed, but it's capped. I think is what you're missing. It's capped at the 157 on your property. So,
It's just
so the 157 can get reduced as commercial property pays more taxes, right? But your 157 won't go up as the commercial properties go up.
If your home is worth 500,000.
Exactly, that's basically.
Yeah, if your home is worth that.
Yeah.
The way I saw it was you're gonna take the total amount of debt divided by the value of the city, and then your share is locked in place based on the value at the time of incorporation or whatever it is. But every year it gets recalculated and the value of the other properties go up. So therefore
They're paying a little bit more, which means you pay a little bit less, in essence. So,
your home value is locked. That helps you a lot.
there's a lot of math involved, I know.
I say the next question, something down there.
I do.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is, okay, so this bond is for primarily parks and sidewalks, right? Or trails.
Park benches and trails, yes.
Right, and so over 20 years' time, it's a long time to be paying for it. So what is the likelihood then of 10 years from now wanting to do something else? Like, is there a likelihood maybe that you would seek more funds, another bond for other things? While we're still paying off this one? And then also, where is the money for upkeep of the trails and the parks and stuff?
Okay, I'll answer that one first because it's a little bit easier.
Okay.
So, the city has estimated, so the maintenance of trails is, virtually there's no maintenance cost associated with that because we're already maintaining the right of way. So that would be part of that maintenance. So that's kind of, there's nothing there. You could actually, if you wanted to make the argument, like for example, in this section where you're taking away a whole section of asphalt and replacing it with a trail and a buffer, there actually could potentially be long-term savings because now when you repave this road, that's a lot of asphalt that you don't have to put down. But generally speaking, the trails, once they're constructed, there's no maintenance associated, additional maintenance. The parks, we estimated for the bond to be about $500,000 a year. Personally, I think that's on the high side because some of these parks we already own and are maintaining to some degree. Certainly, adding amenities will add to that cost. What the city has done is we sold a piece of property last year, and we allocated $3 million of that money specifically for the maintenance of these facilities. So that basically covers us for 6 years. Probably is longer than that because that's 6 years from when they're built. So it'll probably take 2 to 3 years to build out the park. So 8 or 9 years of maintenance that's been covered. And what that did, so now that there's no additional strain on the city's operational budget to fund the maintenance here. And also that gives the city now 6 years to figure out, okay, what's the long-term solution? You know, we're hopeful that these improvements will add value to our tax digest, our tax revenues go up on the commercial side, and maybe that additional revenue, but we'll have a couple of years to figure that out.
As far as the trails, there may be slight increases when those trails are lit, there's electricity, there's lighting, there's an option for that being a cost.
Right.
There's also right-of-way maintenance. We just renewed a contract for the sections of your streetscape where nobody lives. The city mows, the city cleans up intersections, the right-of-way maintenance. That might be part of this as well.
Right.
So there might be some cost to the trails.
Yeah,
I don't think it's zero.
It's meant, yeah. But that was accounted for in that $500,000 figure is what we were told that to expect the additional cost. So we got at least 6 years covered. So.
With the other part of my question about an additional, any future bonds.
So basically you're asking me to speculate what a future council may do. What I would say, the way I would answer that is this. If that were a discussion to come up, I think the only reason that would come up is if this was a raging success and people wanted more. But if that were to happen, that would go through the same process. There would be a ballot referendum, and the voters would have to approve it. So I can't, again, you're asking me to speculate on what a future council.
You're the residents want a big water park in the middle of the Dunwoody Village. You tell us to put a bond referendum on, and you all vote to put a water park.
Right.
It's a whole different.
But the council wouldn't be able to issue that on their own. It would be the same process. There would be a question on the ballot. There would be a specific, again, through this whole thing, there'd be, all right, we're asking to approve a bond for X, Y, and Z projects moving forward. So
You can only bond for capital projects. You can only bond for capital projects.
Okay.
So you can't bond for new policemen to be serving the streets. You can't bond for, you can only bond for stuff.
not operating expenses.
No operating expenses.
Maybe to springboard off her question, where you didn't want to get into speculation, is there anything in the bond process that would prevent the city from bringing up a bond in 2 years?
There's no legal thing that would prevent that.
Okay, now, if the bond failed, is there anything, same type question, is there anything that would stop the city from bringing a new bond forward in a year or two?
There is a time period we have to wait, but it could come back up. I think that more becomes a political will question. Whereas if the residents had said no, are we going to move forward with it?
That's speculation part,
Yeah.
but you say there's a time window. Do you know what that time window is?
It could be a spot as early as next year,
I ask because I've heard comments that if this fails, then nothing will happen for 10 to 15 years. The city could bring a bond up in 1 or 2 years.
I guess it's possible, yeah.
I don't know of any time frame that
Yeah.
you could, so I don't.
I know we were told there is a time frame, but I don't specifically know what that is, so I don't want to misrepresent that. Yes.
So I just wanted to offer, I think there was a bond referendum in 2011, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
That bond referendum failed,
It did.
so we're in 2023, so it took 12 years to get it back on the ballot. So that's the only comparative you have, is it took 12 years.
Yeah.
So 12 years, though, that's not the legal process.
No.
That's the
That's political
that's
will.
the political process. Okay.
That's political will, where it took 12 years for a council to say, hey, we're going to put this out there again, yes.
And how long have you guys been working on this?
For several years, really it goes back over 2 years. We never even had a capital improvement plan. We instituted that into as part of the budget process. I believe 3 years ago was the first time we did that. That's when we first started because we had a whole list of projects, but we didn't have a plan for getting them built, and we didn't have priorities assigned to them. So that capital improvement plan was the first step to prioritizing, say, here's our 5-year plan for our known revenue and what we're planning to build with it, so that residents can see where the money was going for the next 5 years, and we could also start to plan for that. And then from that grew into us trying to get some more of those projects in the Citizens Committee, which I mentioned.
Yes, personnel costs are usually the highest cost of any project. How many jobs will we need to add, or positions will we need to add to manage these new parks?
So the maintenance is done through a contract, an outside contract. Those aren't city employees. So there would be additional costs on our maintenance. But as far as staff, basically, most of our programming at the parks is done with partnerships with nonprofits. So it's not really city staff running the baseball and the soccer and all of those types of things. I don't know that there would be a need for additional staff to operate these parks. I would anticipate that we would enter into similar agreements with softball organizations, with lacrosse organizations, and other sports to offer those services to the residents without the city having to. And that's the reason we do that, because we don't have the staff to run those programs, but we want to have those available for our residents. So.
All right. I'm going to interrupt you for a little bit. Hi everyone, my name is Lambert. I'm your state representative. You probably remember seeing my name on yard signs all over Dunwoody North. To give you a little bit of background during my time down at the State House, I was appointed to 2 committees that is actually very important to our district. The first is infrastructure and technology, and arts and entertainment. Arts and entertainment is Hollywood, essentially. And just recently, the speaker appointed me to a national council for infrastructure and natural resources. So I can tell you trails is constantly being discussed, nationally, locally, on a statewide level. The city of Dunwoody, I want to give a shout out to John and Tom, that Dunwoody has always held as a model for fiscal responsibility. Down at the State House, when we talk about suburban cities, and Dunwoody is actually more of an urban city. We handled, or they handled, the crisis getting through the pandemic at a fiscal level very few other cities in the state and nationally were able to do. So they are very fiscally responsible. Dunwoody is fiscally responsible. So what's going on with the state? So in 2020, the state was at about $500 billion GDP. We want to grow. You probably heard the governor say, we're going to be the #1 state in the country for business. Well, it's estimated that by the end of this year, 2023, our GDP will be around $700 billion. Now, if you talk to the governor, you talk to me, you talk to the Georgia Chamber of Commerce that represents Fortune 500 companies and small businesses, they gave me an A+ rating. Their plan is in the next 10 to 20 years to reach $1.5 trillion as a GDP. We're talking about a transformation of Georgia that is once in a lifetime. It changes everything. So how do we get there? This week I spent time with the Council on Quality Growth and the Atlanta Regional Commission. And all they talked about was Beltline and trails. So I'm going to point to Roswell. They actually passed a $180 million budget last year. $107 million of it is for trails, sidewalks, and parks. Milton passed a $25 million. They're considering passing another one because they saw how important the trails and the parks are to the economic development of their city. Now we're neighbor to Doraville and Shannon. They're building out their trails with Brookhaven as part of the Peachtree Creek Greenway Trail System. We have the largest economic development in our district right in our backyard, the Assembly, where the GM plant used to be. That is a movie studio that is going to be, if not the biggest, one of the biggest television and movie studios in the country, if not in the world. They're building a trail right through the middle of it so that people can walk by and see movies being made and go to restaurants and entertainment there. Doraville and Chamblee is connected to it. We don't have a way to connect directly to it. But the North Peachtree and Tillamook and Doraville, we have a choice. We can either be connected to those cities and have a path to Assembly, or we can silo ourselves off. That's just the reality. This is what the business community wants. I've talked to businesses all over the country who have talked about coming to Georgia, and I always say, what about Dunwoody? And the first thing they ask is, how are the parks, how are the trails, and how is the labor force? They can't come if there's no labor force. The labor force is not Gen X, it's not us. We like to be left alone. The generations before are retired. So that leaves millennials and the Gen Zers, Gen Yers. They have a whole different outlook on life. It's live, work, play. We're accommodating that. We're not accommodating us. We're accommodating that. Because we're looking 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And they have made it very clear. We want trails and parks. And so I spent some time in Chicago, Indianapolis, and San Francisco. And it's a weird thing, because they challenged me. Long, don't rent a car. Take an Uber to your hotel, and then ride a scooter everywhere, and see if that's faster than a car. And it's an odd thing to take a trail on a little scooter, rest in the suit, and then see a little robot also running down the sidewalk, making a delivery. That's going to be the future. We're in the infant stages of it, but that's where it's going to be. When we talk about the Assembly, we're talking about second-tier, third-tier jobs, which means animation studios, special effects studios, catering companies. They may not want to fight the traffic to get to the studios. They're probably going to look at trails. That's what the younger generation looks at. When I talk to companies that are going to be suppliers for Rivian, Kia, Hyundai, LG, same thing. They talk about accessibility. How are the trails going to look? If my employees get stressed out, is there a place for them to walk and refocus? Right? And again, Dunwoody is Dunwoody. If you want to silo yourself off, you can. But if we're going to grow, this is the path. And John, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but Dunwoody is landlocked. There is no unincorporated. I talk to Shanley, Doraville, Sandy Springs, Brookhaven on a weekly basis. And the thing they ask me is annexation. We need increased tax revenue through annexation. That's not an option for Dunwoody. There is no place for Dunwoody to annex. And as Tom said earlier, businesses cover 70% of our taxes. Now, we can build more dense homes, bring in more population to raise our tax revenue, but we don't really want that. I've heard it from all kinds of meetings over the last 2 years. People don't want denser apartments, they don't want denser housing. So the only thing we can do is fill up the commercial spaces we have. There's some commercial spaces up off Home Church Chapel across from Walmart. That's available. There's, I think, plenty of buildings in the perimeter area, the old State Farm buildings. We gotta fill those up.
If you're saying offices, we have.
Yeah, offices. We need to fill those spaces up. That is what will increase the tax revenue. The second thing, I'll close with this. Dunwoody has to become a destination. I was talking to a gentleman and he was telling me back in the 50s and 60s, Alpharetta, Johns Creek, Milne came to Dunwoody for meals, for entertainment. Dunwoody Village was a hit place to be. And he said, I gotta tell you, I've been to Alpharetta, Milne. He's like, I feel like Dunwoody's getting stale. I don't think Dunwoody's getting stale, but tourism is going to be a huge factor in the development of our city. It has to be. We've got a music studio being built right down the street. And our hotels need it. We get a lot of our funds from hotel revenue. We need them maxed out every day at 90%. That means bringing in more corporations. That's the bottom line. And that's how Georgia is going to grow into a $1.5 trillion GDP. And either we're a part of it or we're not. And so, one last plug, sorry, I said, but our host is also on the ballot, and I'll keep that simple. If the host fails, we may lose our freeze on our property taxes. So whatever you were paying in property taxes in 2008, how many years, 12, 13 years, 14 years later, you may see a huge tax jump. So we gotta pass the host. The second thing is SPLOST. It's a renewal, it's not a new tax. So however we've operated as a county and a city based on those SPLOST funds, we need those funds to continue what we've been doing. So vote for the SPLOST, vote for the host, and I'd like to see you all vote for the bond, but it's really simple. One is where the millennials and the next generation wants to see our city go, and the other is status quo, where we're at right now.
And one thing I will point out, because Long alluded to it, or not alluded to, you spoke to, there are several questions on the ballot. If you have not yet voted, I would strongly encourage you to go to the My Voter page and view a sample ballot, or if you're old school, like a paper copy, because there are a lot of questions on there, and it can be a little overwhelming at the ballot box if you haven't reviewed it in advance. As Long said, the e-host and the SPLOST are very important to pass. The SPLOST is how we pave our roads and get capital improvement, or capital needs for our police department, police cars, tasers, all those things that they need to do their jobs. And the e-host, that is a huge tax credit on your tax bill. That will go away. It basically is assigned to a lot of the county funds, not city taxes. That will go away. It is a significant portion rebate on your tax bill. If they both fail, they both pass or fail together. One can't go, so if it does, as Long said, we go back to the old host, the freeze goes away, and there's a lot less money available for Dunwoody for paving our streets and supplying the police department.
That's a countywide.
And it's a countywide ballot, yes.
Thomas, there's no new tax with either one of them, these are existing taxes?
So SPLOST and the e-host are approved by the voters for a time period, typically 5 to 6 years. They both expire in March of 2024.
But we're paying them now.
We're paying them out, so this is simply a renewal of, it's not a new 2% in taxes, it's a renewal of what we have. So the sales tax rate would not change. And the benefit of the sales tax, as people probably know, is that people that shop in Perimeter Mall and that visit the city and stay in hotels and work in the office spaces and buy things in Dunwoody, they're contributing to that money, so the homeowners are really getting a good benefit from that sales tax revenue from all the people that come in and spend their money in Dunwoody. Yes?
So you, like you talked about the importance of looking for parks and parks, how do we stand comparatively in terms of the amount of park space we provide for our residents?
So, the Trust for Public Land has done research on park acreage, and they've calculated that the average acreage, park acreage for cities in the country is 38.9 acres per 1,000 residents. They recommend that cities should have 10 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. The city of Dunwoody is currently at 4 acres of parks per 1,000 residents. What I like to tell people is you can't necessarily blame the city for what we inherited from DeKalb County, but I think you can hold us accountable for what we do moving forward to try and improve that. So this will help with that. Yes.
To me, those statistics mean a lot. Like, I don't see that talked about.
Yeah, so again, I'll talk about this as opinion here, because I said it would be factual, but my son just moved to Minneapolis. He graduated college away, got his first job up in Minneapolis. And we went up there, me and my wife, to help him find an apartment. And every place we went, trails and parks, and there were people everywhere using those amenities. And I was blown away, because it was kind of timely for me with what we're doing here. It's like, wow, this is the vision we're trying to create in Dunwoody. And there was people of every generation out there. I literally saw the cliche, the senior citizens sitting there playing chess in the park. I mean, I saw young families pushing strollers. I saw all ages out there. And I was blown, and it wasn't just one area, the entire city, everything around there. Bloomington, St. Louis Park, Uptown, every place we looked at an apartment, parks and trails everywhere. And it was really, to me, it was eye-opening from the perspective of how far behind we are a lot of communities in that area. One thing I want to say real quick before I forget, I have some flyers in the back. The front side has just general information about the bond. There's a QR code on the top that you can snapshot that. I'll take you to the city website where there's a lot more information on this. You can drill down to more specific plans for each park and all that. The back side is information about the host and the slots. If you want to get that, I just wanted to say that before I forgot. Thanks, Tom. Yeah. So yes.
So of these 9 projects, based on the wording in the bond referendum, is the city legally bound to complete any of these projects?
Okay, so there's a little confusion with that. So the actual bond question says $6 million, parks, green space, and trails. Any information that the city provides is considered legally binding as far as this is what you're going to build with that. So it's not specifically in the question, but if we put on our website these projects, we're legally bound. Now, there is what people are calling a disclaimer on the website. This does not indicate priority and subject to change based on the needs of the city. So some people have interpreted that to mean this is some elaborate bait and switch. We're going to tell you this, we're going to do something else. First of all, by law, it has to be parks, green space, and trails. There's nothing else that can be built with it. But specific to these projects, the reason why that language is in there is 2 reasons. Let's just say, for example, we start to build Wildcat Park, and we're going to build a splash pad, and there's a granite outcropping there that we have to blast and would drastically change the cost of the project. By law, if we have this project, this map on there without that disclaimer, we have to look exactly what's here. We could change this. That gives the city the flexibility to change the plan as needed. There's also questions of why we haven't assigned a dollar value to each specific park, why there's an itemized list. And the reason for that is quite simple. If we say that Wildcat Park is going to cost $10 million and Homecoming Park is going to cost $6 million, and we're able to build Wildcat Park for $8 million, well, guess what? We promised the residents that we're spending $10 million here. By law, we have to spend an extra $2 million there, whether we needed it or not. So let's say Homecoming came in at $8 million and we only estimated $6 million. Well, we can now shift that additional funding over to that park. So that's the reason the language is there, is to give the city the flexibility to be the best stewards of the money, so that we can deliver the projects that we've promised everyone. It is not there to try and dupe anyone or create a different project list. This is what the city is committed to.
So this disclaimer, let's say, let's talk Homecoming Park. The city had an opportunity to buy that there was a big plot of land to buy.
Right.
If some other plot of land, I don't know where the big one, but if some other big plot of land came up, could the city council say, we would want to purchase that as green space, even though it's not one of these 9 projects? I'm hearing a yes from you.
Yes, because that's what the bond rush for.
So could
But
that
we
mean,
also put softball.
could that mean that if this option came up, then that some of these projects would not happen?
I believe these projects are gonna happen. This council, or at least as far as I know, this council is gonna look and do this stuff right here. Whether we're legally bound to or not, I believe that that is the intention to do that. If another piece of green space came open, yes, that's available too, because that's in the bond.
So I would answer it this way, and again, opinion, not fact. I just want to be crystal clear whenever I change those lanes. Is in my opinion, and I haven't been on the council. I've been on for 6 years now. I won't go all the way back to 15 like John. But I believe since the city's incorporated, I believe the city has been very good at listening to the community, on delivering on its promises and delivering quality products. I mean, look at Brook Run, look at all the other parks we've built. I think the city has historically found it very important to be responsive to the residents and to do what they've asked, and been completely transparent about all of that. It's kind of ironic, as part of the pushback we're getting from some people is the fact that we've been so transparent and that we've provided so much information. They're trying to be honest. So again, it's what's your trust of your local officials. Of course, our report card is always on election day, right? If we didn't do what we promised you, then put someone else in office. But it's all, I get it, trust the government, right? But I think it's a little different at the local level. I think the city has a good history of delivering on its promises. So to suggest that some people, and I'm not saying you, but some people, that this is some elaborate bait and switch and that we're going to change all the projects once we get the money, I think it's unfounded, in my opinion. Yes, there's a question.
To dovetail off of that, I have been one of those people that has been very skeptical of the bait and switch, but from what I understand after conversations I've had today, it's a matter of, that disclaimer is poor semantics. It's been poorly worded because Alfred and these other cities have essentially the same disclaimer, but they're more they also, I guess, inform their citizens that they have this, if there was going to be a change, there would be public meetings and discussion about it. And the same thing would happen here, from what I understand, if a change needed to be made or was proposed.
You're exactly right.
You're not including that in the disclaimer language, which makes people, I think it might help if that was included.
Yeah, that's a valid point.
It's semantics.
But everything that would be done here is all going to be done in a public forum with community input and very transparent. There's no behind closed doors changing of plans. Yes.
So if I understand this correctly, then you've already talked about a perfect example of where this could backfire, right? And I say that it backfires to our benefit. So Brook Run, I think you mentioned, was the result, the improvements in Brook Run were the result of a DeKalb County bond referendum before the city was incorporated.
Correct.
And they did allocate a specific dollar amount to Brook Run, right? And what happened was the city incorporated, and they still had to commit the money, even though the city of Dunwoody was no longer part of DeKalb County. So they were, by law, forced to spend the money that they could have spent elsewhere, or probably really wanted to, elsewhere in DeKalb County. So we were if I understand that correctly, the benefactor of their mistake.
Absolutely.
And we're trying to avoid not committing dollar amounts so we don't repeat that same kind of mistake.
And it allows us to be the best stewards that we can of the bond revenues, and I think that's the full intention of it there. It's not to change anything. As John said, we've committed to doing this, and if the bond's approved because we get the money up front and not have to wait to save up, construction of these projects are going to start within the next year or two. Again, the trails might be a little bit longer just by their nature, so they'll be under construction. Once that's done, there's no changing. I mean, they're set in stone. Yes.
What happens
The bond referendum is only approved for $60 million, so we can only issue bonds up to $60 million. We felt we were very, we feel that the number is, we're comfortable there with being able to complete these projects. If the cost went over, we would have to find another source of revenue to finish these projects out. As I mentioned, there is some federal money tied to some of these projects, so about $7.25 million. So again, that's an outside source of revenue that's helping to fund some of it.
Do you think the 60 million is a reachable number to do all this?
I do. I think so. In my opinion, I think some of the estimates were conservatively high. There was reason for some of them to be high. For example, the Wildcat Park, when I questioned our parks director as to why there were certain portions of that were very high, they just wanted to make sure that they accounted for the unknown because that was a former school site. They got kind of a little, I think it was a little once bitten, twice shy with Brook Run when they started doing some of the construction there and started demoing some of the old hospitals and the old buildings. They found things they never anticipated to be there, which added to the cost of the project. So they wanted to be conservative and put in extra money to account for that so that we had the funds available. So I, based on everything that we've reviewed, I feel confident. Of course, building cost inflation is a real thing. So the sooner we build them, the more reliable those numbers are. But I feel confident that we can get that done. And as I said, if we build them 55 million instead of 60, then we only issue 55 million. Yes?
So you pretty much prioritize, like maybe leave one out toward the end if you're getting close on the 60 million, I would guess. Like they all wouldn't be happening at the same time.
So I would anticipate that all the parks projects could be going on at the same time, and there's actually a benefit to doing it that way because there's some economies of scale of doing that. So you're only mobilizing, let's say the people that do the grading. So they're only coming out to Dunwoody once. So we'll have one person project managing all the parks at once, so they can move them here and then move them there. They can move the pieces to the places where they're needed. Obviously, they're different scale. Waterford Park is a playground and some soft surface trails, not nearly to the scale of Wildcat, which is probably involving a whole lot of grading and other infrastructure there. But we can mobilize those resources and potentially have some additional savings in the overall construction costs. Yes?
You alluded to it initially, but I wanted to ask the actual question. The properties for the 2 additional parks, including the softball fields, you have an idea of location?
We have been actively engaged in conversation for that. I'm optimistic. I can't discuss it because it's. But I will say this: if a deal is reached, that entire process will be open and transparent and done in a public setting. But anytime the city's dealing with real estate, that's kind of done in what's called executive session, or because it's difficult to publicly negotiate. It doesn't put the city in a favorable position to get a good price. If someone knows the city's bidding on something, prices and other situations can change. So, but we're actively engaged in a conversation that, again, from what I've heard, we're optimistic. We have a plan B if that falls through, but that conversation hasn't really progressed. But we're fully committed to getting that done. But I was really hoping that we could announce the location before election day, just so we can make it that much more real and say this is where it's going. But it doesn't appear that that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I only ask because the state of real estate seems, I don't want to use a word, but volatile. And with what Long was saying about the amount of investment coming into the state, it just seems like timeliness. It would be important.
Oh, absolutely. The sooner you can make a deal, the better for everybody. Anyway else will get that much faster too. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Were there any discussions of with the softball to utilize it a little bit like the Brook Run Park with the connection? You mentioned that having an outside source to to provide this softball services, kind of like Dunwoody Senior does, is there any indication that there might also be some of the influx of revenue potential that Dunwoody Senior brings with these items, or are they truly intended to stay just neighborhood park?
So the softball, I would imagine that we would have some sort of, it's called facility usage agreement that we have, and there with the city has certain standards that could be a nonprofit and insurance and all these other requirements that they have to meet. I would anticipate that we would enter into something like that. I do know that the softball program for the high school and the feeder down to the middle school is really expanded, and they've only got the one field over there at the high school, which doesn't have lights and really isn't.
One sad field.
It's in bad shape. So I imagine they will be using those fields. And again, some people would say, well, why are we bailing out the school system? Well, honestly, I personally, I don't view it that way. I view it as these are Dunwoody residents that have a need to play softball. Let's provide that. If the school system's failing, let us provide that for them. So it's a benefit to the community as a whole. I would also, and again, I don't know, I would hope that maybe in the evenings, an organization like Atlanta Club Sport or something could maybe run an adult softball league. But that's all at this time. No deals have been signed, so that's all speculation on my part. So.
But I guess the aspect is you would be open to kind of a revenue generating agreement comparable to Dunwoody Senior Baseball doing
For softball, yeah.
Yeah, that's already happening. Yeah, and I think I alluded to this before.
The softball's already happening. The girls are playing softball at Brook Run Park and paying just a facility use agreement just like everybody else, right?
Yeah, so what we did, because so again, it's largely with the expansion of the girls program at the schools, they're getting usage of one of the fields in the fall, the baseball fields, but that's not as...
That's the middle school team, and then that's their team and their school field. The high school team does not have access.
Right, and really, it's not the ideal situation because baseball has mound, softball doesn't. It's not an easy process to move a couple 100-pound playground. And also, with softball being there, certainly those girls deserve access to fields, but that means that baseball has less offerings as well. So having baseball have their own facility and softball have their own phone, everyone gets much more opportunity. And I'll say this too, because there is the demand for field space far exceeds available field time. We cannot fulfill all of the requests that we have. So as far as the revenue, the intent isn't to make money off of it. I think the intent is if we can make those fields self-sustaining. And a lot of times the partner organizations that we have, the nonprofits, they have maintenance responsibilities at the field, as does the city. And sometimes they make capital improvements that would benefit the city. So for example, Dunwoody Senior Baseball is going to be paying for shade sales over the bleachers there. They're funding that through their own fundraising, but it's a city park, so we get the benefit of that. So, but good question, yeah.
It would be a lot. It would be a loss. I mean, we've spent an incredible amount of hours sitting at softball tournaments in Calhoun County and Henry County and all over, and there really isn't a good tournament destination here in North Atlanta.
Yeah.
It would be a great destination.
Be full all summer. Be full all summer.
Yeah, all summer.
Yeah, I imagine those fields would be fully programmed, absolutely.
All summer. Like I'm just trying to balance the use. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of the point. It's like, to Long's point, I want everyone to move here so my property value goes up. I also want to be able to use the park that my property value pays. And there really is a balance being there that I know that it's a lot of speculation on your part. I mean, kind of the Dunwoody Senior Baseball thing, there were a lot of angry folks on every side of what was really kind of we kind of got forced into, and a whole bunch of things like that. I get that. It's like I feel like we're a little bit more in control of this one we put a bond referendum up, the citizens vote, we kind of have all of the buy-in, and then triangulating, all right, hey, this really is a destination for us. Let's fill up these motel rooms by making all summer long have softball tournaments here. In one side, great. Another side, I'd like to have a pickup game with my kids, and I'm out.
Yeah.
Right? You just said you cannot put enough bodies on that field because it's already full at W Senior Baseball? Are we creating something it's a comparable situation and we need to get our heads around before we punch a ballot? So, I don't.
Luckily, the girls only play for 1 day. From 6 in the morning till 1 in the morning.
Yeah, and obviously the more field space.
At 11 o'clock,
More-
it's going at 11.
And the more field space we have, the more opportunity there is for people. There is, I will say this, all of our fields do have blocked off, open, free time for anyone to use, but it's not necessarily the most convenient times. So hopefully having more field space gets more access for everyone. And we do have those 2 grass open fields that will not be programmed. One in Wildcat and one in Homecoming. They're quite large. One is I think 250 feet by 145 feet, which is almost a full-size field. And the other one is slightly smaller than that. So, but anyone can go out there and kick a ball or anything like that. So.
Throw down some bases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the ball.
Yeah.
So, are there any other questions or anything?
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. If you think of questions, I'm always available, and John is always available. So don't hesitate.